Listeners, today we're happy to be rejoined by our dear friend and co-host, Julie. If you're a regular listener, then you know why Julie has been out. And if you're a new listener, you may not know that Julie's husband, John, passed away in November after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. She's taken the last couple months off, but she's back with us today. And listeners, we didn't feel like we could just jump back into our usual format or topics without sharing with you some of what has happened in Julie's life. So today we're going to have a conversation about that as friends. And Julie, we want to thank you for being willing to share with us and with listeners.
Sure. I mean, I think it's going to be good for me too. Like before I can move on and talk about whatever we talk about every week to kind of just get this out there,
Right. Yeah.
So, thank you.
So listeners, this isn't like we have 10 questions and Julie's going to answer them. We're just going to lead down a road. And so Julie, why don't we just start out with, because I know that this is just such an inadequate question because there's been so many ways, but how has God met you in this journey?
Oh, that is a big question. I mean, it just to give you a little recap, because I can't even remember when the last time I was on. I think it was probably October or early November. And John went on hospice on October 24th, and he lived 3 weeks on hospice, passed away November 12th. So there's just so many things that happened during that time that God showed up and met us, and it was just amazing to watch. And it's still good for me to remember those, recount those things. First of all, hospice is everything everybody says it is. I when everybody told me about how wonderful hospice was, it just kind of went in one ear and out the other. Like, well, how could that be? This is about death. How could anything good, be there? But they were so compassionate and so empathetic and so helpful. From the people that answer the phone, that aren't even nurses, to the people that come to your house to deliver equipment. Just a special group of people. And then towards the end, I just wasn't getting any sleep. I was needing to be up most of the night and day. And, I could do that for a couple of nights. And then I just hit a wall and thought, I have to do something else. So I started looking for a caregiver who could stay overnight, at the house so I could sleep. And I never had a piece about any of the big companies that I kind of interviewed. And actually, Marie put something out on our neighborhood Facebook and just asked for somebody. And this lady responded, and that's what she does. Young lady, middle-aged lady, and she just lived around the corner from me. She could walk to my house. And we absolutely loved her. She ended up coming to John's funeral. She's baked a sourdough bread, went way above the call of duty. And, she stayed up all night with John. And I just thought, when we moved into this house 5 months prior to that, God already knew, like, the lady that was going to take care of John lived around the corner. And that was just really neat because I wasn't thinking about that when we moved in, of course. And so it's just neat to see that God already had that lined up, because she was really an answer to prayer. Because when she got here, I went right to bed and went to sleep.
Wow. So God just granted you peace with her.
Yes. She was just wonderful. And then kind of one of the biggest things that I think God did for us was nurses were coming every week, twice a week to check on John. And nobody ever really gave us a timeline. I mean, we could see he was declining, but I'd always ask, like, what do you think? And they would just say, well, I don't know. And he passed away on a Sunday. Well, on the Saturday, the day before, I got a call from this nurse that I'd never met, because, we always had the same nurse. They want to keep continuity of care. And she said, I'm not your nurse, but I just think I'm going to come by and check on John. She said, I just feel like he's been on hospice 3 weeks. I just need to come check on him. So I said, okay. And our daughter was here from Texas. And so she came and she walked in the room and was very alarmed. She said, oh my goodness, he's so under-medicated. She goes, we've got to get, she just like threw her bags down and got to work and took charge. And I was like, I felt bad. I was like, what am I doing wrong? And she said, well, he just seems restless and he can't tell you when he's uncomfortable. You have to look at all these signs. And so she just said, we've got to make some changes. She called, got some medication changes, even just changed some things with the bed and everything, just was very take charge. And then she looked at me and she said, I don't think he's going to live another 24 hours.
Mm.
And we
Oh
were
my
just all
goodness.
very taken back by that. Like we had not been told that, up until this point
Right.
that it was that quick. And so Molly was here. She was going to be flying home that day. She canceled her flight. And we
Mhm.
just started pulling chairs into the bedroom, like the dining room chairs, whatever. We sat on the bed. We turned on his favorite music and like we played jazz and then we played praise music and everybody just started like talking and telling stories. And we really laughed way more than we cried. Like we told fun stories like, oh, do you remember this time we did this and dad did this? And so we did that was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and he passed away at 1:30 in the morning. And so we
Oh,
were all right there, just as I had envisioned that kind of a time, but I
right.
never really believed it would happen because my daughter lives so far away and like just that's just not something you always get.
Right.
Yeah. And so and the hospice nurse said, hearing is the last sense to go. And so she said, I think
Mm.
he heard all of that.
Mm.
And I personally think he did too, because earlier in that day, I had written what I wanted said at his funeral. I had not been able to think about a funeral the whole 3 years of his illness. I just kept putting it off.
Oh
But
my.
but the day before, I just started writing things down. And so I sent it to an email to our pastor friend who was going to do the service. And his wife had read it and said, "Oh, that's such a beautiful tribute. I hope you read it to John." She didn't know I had just written it. And I said, "Oh, I just felt so bad because I was like, I haven't read it to John, and he's not really awake." So I just went in there by myself, shut the door, and got down in his ear and read the whole thing to him. And he was in a hospital bed in our room at that point, and he held on to both rails and sat totally up, and then he laid back down. And that was so I know he heard it. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I think he was just trying to respond in some way, and that was all he could do. So, and that was before we gathered in his room. So I know he heard all of it. So that was, to me, that was one of the biggest ways God met us. That
Just
it
to know
wasn't,
that he knew.
yeah, yeah, and that everybody was there, and so.
Wow.
And just, I think suffering kind of brings who we are to the surface, like not just the one suffering, but the people around you. I mean, people, following their hearts and their gifts and showing up and doing some pretty wonderful things. And I'm still overwhelmed by all of that. Like sometimes people I didn't know. I mean, podcast listeners and friends of friends would show up with things. And even in our new neighborhood, people would just drop things off at the door. And all that was really, really special.
Julie, I'm so thankful to hear you testifying of how God has met you along this path of suffering, this path of pain and grief, and that He's provided Himself even in the midst of the timing. And I know I'm so thankful to hear of your testimony of God in the hard times. I'm thankful for you to be willing to let us hear your journey right now in the midst, because you're still in the midst. And I hate to even use this word forward, but I mean, time just has a way of continuing to move. And I would love to have you share maybe how you're starting to move forward, the steps that you're taking now.
Well, I feel like I'm doing really well, and that even feels weird sometimes. Like why? I question why, and is something going to change and it's just going to come crashing down? But I just feel like the last 3 years I've wrestled with all those questions. Why John? Why me? Why cancer? Why this cancer? Why now? So I've had a lot of time to process and pre-grieve. I've said that before.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mhm.
was just such a relief to know that John isn't suffering. He's whole, he's healed. I mean, when he passed away, we were there when he took his last breath, and I just took his hand and said, "You made it." Like it was like a cheering on, like
Mm-hmm.
you did this and you did it well. And so for me, that's what I think about every day. Like
Okay.
where he is and that he is whole. And I know that still leaves a big hole here. Of course I miss him, but that really is a comfort. And and I've known that my whole life, but until it's someone you're really close to who's
Mm-hmm.
on the other side, it becomes a real comfort. And I prayed for healing, and I kind of wondered if I would be angry if he wasn't healed, or disappointed. And I don't, and there's nothing wrong with praying for healing. I'm praying for people right now that they're healed, but I think you have to have hope in something beyond just a healed body or healed cancer cells, because eventually
Mm-hmm.
those that are healed are still going to pass away. You know what I mean? Like that can't be the ultimate hope. It has to
Mm-hmm.
be in something beyond that. So, right now I'm just trying to do the next thing. You hear people say that, just do the next right thing. And unfortunately that starts with paperwork.
Oh.
Ordering death certificates, notifying everybody that you have an account with and some financial connection with, and closing his life down. Like that's what you do. And a lot of people say that that's a terrible thing to have to do while you're grieving. For me, it's kind of been something to do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm accomplishing things, I'm moving forward. And so that has actually helped me. And just that he passed away in November, and then there was my birthday and Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so I wanted to keep moving forward for my family, for those things,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
it does concern me a little bit. January and February are pretty
Mm-hmm.
pretty gray, dark months. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about what these months are going to be like, but so far I think the energy of Christmas and all that has kind of carried me along.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that's kind of made it a little easier for me, if I had lost John in a tragic accident suddenly, this would be a whole different story.
Right.
But I've been sitting in church by myself for a year. I've been going and meeting friends for dinner, like couple friends, by myself.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, my life isn't different, other than I miss him terribly. I miss his voice, his conversation, his physical presence. But it's kind
Right.
of like I've already felt a little bit on my own
Mm-hmm.
already,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just try to accept most invitations to get out and be with people. I'm trying to say yes. Sometimes it feels strange to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
Yeah.
you worry about what other people think. Like, I can't believe she's doing this when,
Mm-hmm.
you
Right.
know,
Well, and I think that people, they may not understand how much you have grieved the past 3 years. Like, even though John died recently, when you found out, they only gave him a couple months. So you already were grieving. You didn't know that you would get almost 3 years. You were always having to be prepared that it could be any time. So I do think that it's not as maybe surprising and fresh. It doesn't look the way it does if someone was sudden. God has been gracious to you. Even I know one of your biggest fears when he first got sick even was just being alone. And the fact that you've had, as much as we have said, I wish that John felt better, like he's alive, but he's not able to do things. When I hear you say now that you've been a year doing things on your own, it's almost like God was saying, I'm going to ease you into this. Because if John had been able to do things with you right up until the last second, that would feel a lot different.
Yeah. So like when I went to church, I think I went maybe 2 weeks after he passed. That wasn't like, oh, this is the first time I'm in church without John. None of that felt new to me or different. So I think that helped. It's kind of weird to think John had to suffer more so I could be prepared, but I mean, there's just no, in my mind, I think, would it be easier if it was sudden? Because it would be on him, but for everybody else, it's easier if you have time,
Well, and just so that listeners know, and I might tear up here, but John's biggest worry, his biggest worry was how Julie would be without him. And so I know that he would gladly suffer 10 more years like that if he thought that it would make it easier on Julie. So
yeah, he would.
I know he would have.
Because he was right up till the end. It was funny doing things to make sure everything was settled. I found out things later that he had done on hospice.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's like, oh my goodness. I need to take your phone away because who knows what could transpire. But one thing I've read, and Marie and I talked about this yesterday, is I've read a lot of writings from grieving people, is that moving forward is not the same as moving on. I'm not forgetting him. I'm not just erasing the past life, but I have to keep going. And that's what actually he would want me to do. And he made sure, he told me that all the time, like, promise me you're going to get up and get out of bed and keep going. And, and I'm not the kind of person, like, crying is therapeutic, but it lasts about 5 minutes. And then I gotta move on. I can't sit in that,
Right.
So it really is just one moment you're laughing and the next minute you tear up and then you're back to, it's just all mingled in, I guess.
Well, I know that you mentioned that you've had a lot of firsts, like you said, your birthday, Thanksgiving, Christmas. So how have you come through this season? Like, what's been helpful? Because from the outside, and I think that even in your mind and in my mind and in John's mind, anyone's mind, like, don't let him go right before Julie's birthday and the holidays. Like, that's what we all prayed for. And we all thought that would be best. But in hindsight, I feel like it's almost been better for you to go through this on the front end. I don't know. Share with listeners how it's been.
I agree. Because, back in the fall, I thought, I don't know if John's going to be here this Christmas. That's going to be so terrible. Like, why, Lord? Why would you take him now? Like, why not let us get through the holidays and then in January? It's weird how you try to tell God, what you need. And so it really was, I think the energy of all those things kept me going, gave me something to look forward to. I mean, our grandkids were going to be here for Christmas. We had a full house, and I don't know. Those things just really helped me. Our Christmas was not sad. Our Thanksgiving was not sad. My birthday was not sad. I mean, I don't know. I jokingly say that I was kind of living off the high of John's funeral for 2 or 3 weeks because it was exactly as I hoped it would be. I worried about it for 3 years because I didn't want to talk about it. We never talked about it. I didn't ask him things. I mean, maybe once when our pastor came over, he mentioned it, and it was really awkward. Like, I just found in a little book that John had written in, and he said, I want my funeral to celebrate my life and honor God. That was his request. So I think we did that. And the Caring Bridge site was a place where people could write about John, and a lot of the people I didn't know. And so I printed those off and I read those periodically, and I had him out at his funeral, like, hearing what kind of doctor he was. That meant a lot to our kids. Like, that's not a world that they knew about that much, So he just meant a lot of different things to different people. And that has been a comfort to me. It's like, while we miss him, I just keep thinking of how much we had. I just kind of say, I'm the luckiest girl in the world. That's how I feel. I really do. And so, I just keep living off the good. And I just feel like John is still giving to us. Like, I think I shared something on Instagram the other day, like just getting us in this house and just our kids and just the comforts I have. Like it's all, the Lord gave me those, but he gave them through John.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so I'm just so thankful for those. So I'm just trying to focus on those things.
Mhm.
So yeah, Christmas was fun, but there was some sadness alongside it. There were smiles and there were tears. There were new memories, and then they would jog old memories. And then we had a new family member in the pictures. And then we had one missing. John was missing in the picture, but we had Liam. So it's just kind of all
Wow.
side by
Yeah.
side.
And do you want to share with
Right.
listeners what you made with some of John's special things?
Oh yeah, for Christmas, if you knew John, he loved clothes. And so he has all these nice wool jackets and sweaters, and I haven't gotten rid of anything, but I did kind of box them up and just put them on shelves to clear out the closet a little bit. And I needed to regain some of my space.
Right.
He definitely took up 3/4 of the closet.
Oh my goodness.
I just thought some of these sweaters are so beautiful, and I had heard of people making t-shirt pillows. But I thought, well, my kids are a little past the age of t-shirt. They're not in college; they have homes, and so I thought I'm going to make some pillow covers out of his sweaters. So I did that. Each one got a pillow, and the sweaters were even ones like from stores my kids had been to with him. So I sewed the tag on the back, like where it came from.
Oh wow.
And one was from Scotland, and then he had a lot of belts, and none of them would fit my kids, and that's not really their style. But David had said, "Oh, I love this belt." He had gotten it in Scotland and had little puffins on it. So I made a camera strap out of that belt for David for Christmas, and he just loved it. I mean, he really loved that. And then from some old sailboat rope, I tied some like Celtic knots and made trivets and coasters and things that I don't know. I just wanted practical things that they could keep in their homes that would just remind them of John.
Yeah.
That gave me a lot to do before Christmas, and my hands were on all of these things that were signs, and memories, and then I was just so excited for Christmas morning when they were going to open them all. So.
And then you got to relive those memories with them on Christmas too.
Yeah, we laughed about John's love of clothes.
Yeah.
Has there been anything that has really just surprised you about this grief journey?
I think grief, it's surprising how it kind of can taint very ordinary things. Like there's certain TV shows I can't watch, certain songs I have to just turn the radio off. I'm anxious to travel again, but I'm nervous that, ooh, what if I don't like it anymore? Like without him. So I'm afraid to, I don't know. It's like, I want to just leave that memory of great travels. Do I want to spoil it by trying it without him? I don't know. It's weird. It causes your mind to kind of go some crazy places. And like, I told people early on when they'd say, "How are you doing?" I would say, "Well, it must not be real yet to me," because it just didn't seem real. A sweet friend at church who lost her husband during COVID said, "Isn't that a gift from God too? Because if it all seemed real at once, you'd be overwhelmed." And I thought, that's such a, it's sad that grief is stretched out, but you do experience it in new ways as you kind of bump into new things that cause you to think about it again, But I mean, I'm a pretty pragmatic person. I know John's not coming back. I never thought that, but the phone is like a real connection, and John had said, "You need to keep my phone because of his contacts." And, he has some documents stored on there and stuff, but like when his phone would ring for a few days, and just for the split second, you just hoped like you just kind of hoped there was some different news, or it was going to be him, or I know that probably sounds very weird.
No, it doesn't.
But I've listened to some of his text and voicemails, and I had asked him early on if he would make me some video messages, and he did. And I just can't listen to him yet. But I checked on his phone, and they're there. There's 4 or 5. So, but that is so cool that you get their voice. Like a long time ago, people say, I've already forgotten their voice. Well, I will never have to forget his voice, So I just can't listen to those yet. I don't know why or when I would be ready, but they're there. Um, and this, I guess I can share this without you guys thinking I'm too strange, but you know what a gift giver John was. I mean, we've talked about.
Yes.
So, okay, so he dies November 12th. My birthday's the 22nd. Yeah, every Amazon package that came to the door, I was like, I bet this is from John.
No, I would have definitely been thinking that too.
And then there wasn't anything, and I still thought it at Christmas. I still thought, and it was like that he either thought about it so far in advance that he was going to make sure I had something, or even weirdly like, could you arrange a gift from the other side?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
so weird to think, but it was like that goes through your mind, and
Yeah.
I'm not even that much of a gift person, like that I need gifts. I like to celebrate my birthday, but it's not about the gifts. But John is just such a gift giver. That was a little hard at Christmas because the kids used to make fun of, like, half the tree was my stuff underneath it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't that way this year. And so I thought, because actually last January, John told me, don't look for anything that's coming in the mail because I've ordered your Mother's Day gift. This is in January. And I was like, why did you order it in January? He goes, well, I saw something. I just wanted to make sure I had it. And I don't think he thought he was not going to be here Mother's Day, So that's kind of what put the thought in my mind is maybe he thought ahead and got me. But he did not. So
yeah.
And then I think that's so selfish, Julie. Like he was not conditioned to be thinking about birthday presents.
But you wanted that one last connection,
And that's just kind of who he was to be thinking about that. That tells you how much he was not himself,
Right.
The last. So
right.
But I do want to say something. I don't know where this would fit in, but it's a comfort to know like millions of people have gone before me and faced the same thing. Like people die every day, and I'm not alone. This will eventually face us all. Like one of the spouses will go first, and sometimes that helps me a lot. Like John used to tell me that all the time and it would make me mad. Like, I don't want to hear that because right now it matters that everything is stinky. Life is wrong. This does not feel right, And sometimes you just want people to see that and acknowledge it.
Right.
So pretty shortly after John's funeral, Marie asked me to play pickleball. I'll just brag on Marie here. And so I went and, I was playing. It was Marie and me, and then I think two ladies that I didn't know. And so I'm having to meet people I don't know. And I think she had told them the situation. So we didn't have to talk about anything. But and I really did enjoy it. I had fun. I did think it was a little weird that I was out playing pickleball, so shortly afterwards. But I just got this really great text from Marie later that afternoon that she had been thinking about me and that she understood that just because I showed up to play pickleball did not mean like everything in my world was okay. Because I think that's a fear is like if I start looking too normal, people just think I'm okay and I'm not still struggling, but you are. So I think I think that's something I would tell people is like, it's just nice to know that people still acknowledge and see that just because you are doing normal things doesn't mean you're back to normal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's hard. I mean, I want from the perspective of a friend with Julie out there, while she's playing pickleball, which is so not important, I'm thinking, how is she even running around? Like, to me, from the outside, that grief must be 1,000,000,000 pounds on your back. And yet I know that she needs to get out and do things. But also you just feel for your friend and you think, how are they even moving? And yet she was and making conversation. And I think that's like what we don't understand until maybe we go through grief or we see someone we love go through grief, that they do still have to get out of bed in the morning. They do still have to grocery
Right.
shop. They do still have to live. They will still smile. They will still enjoy things, but there's a heaviness that may get lighter as time goes on, but like just to know that they're doing all that while they feel that way. Like I mean, that's so courageous to do all that while you know they must be hurting.
Will say that I think more of my heaviness was before he passed, though. I really do. I feel like it has gotten lighter because it's just hard to watch somebody not feel good, lose every meal they try to eat, just and lose down to 90 pounds. Like none of that is just not the way it's supposed to be, and that's just hard to watch. So I think it was actually heavier, while he was alive.
Yeah.
Well, Julie, what would you like others to understand about grief in general? Like, because I think that we all can imagine maybe, but we can't really imagine. And so we think we might understand, but we don't really. So what would you want your friends and just people to understand about grief?
I mean, one simple thing is like, you don't hurt me when you say his name and you talk about him. Actually, like silence around his name makes him seem invisible and forgotten. So I want to still hear his name. And I've really tried to do that a lot. David lives here with us, and I just use John's name all the time. Like, oh, Dad loved that movie. Or, what would Dad do? Or what do you think Dad would say about that? Or, oh, Dad would be so upset with me right now because I did, like I just, I don't ever want them to think, oh, Mom is this fragile thing. And if we say his name, it's just going to spiral down. Like I want his name to be in conversation and talked about and, to consider like his point of view and how he thought about things. And so, I went out to dinner with a couple that we're close to last night, and I think they were a little bit afraid to talk about John. I was like, no, please do,
Yes.
And I think I've heard from a lot of people say that that's true,
Yes.
And, and if I tear up because it's not that I wish you hadn't, that's just normal. I mean,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's one other big thing that I have been praying about, and God gave me an answer recently, and I think it's really cool. I have heard, I told you I've been reading a lot of writings from people grieving for the last 3 years. And one thing that I hear over and over and over again, and so it must be true, is that grief never goes away. It never gets better. It never ends. Oh, when I would hear that, I would get so angry. Like, no, this can't be. This can't be, because people are functioning, they're working, they're moving, they're living their life. So, and I'm not criticizing anybody that's ever said that to me. I just knew that I wanted to tell people something different. I wasn't ever going to tell somebody grief never goes away. And I don't know, like I'm only 2 months in. So they actually may be right, and it may be true, but I still don't want to say that. I was reading a devotional on December 19th, and it was just the perfect answer. It said, life is a steep climb, and it does the heart good to have somebody call back, who's ahead, and say, come on, keep going, like calling you up. And we're all climbers together, and we must help one another. It takes strength and steady step to find the summits. And as you go up, the outlook widens with the altitude, and you get a different perspective. The higher you go, the further along you go. And I thought that is the answer, because, I love hiking, and hiking has some great analogies. I want to be somebody that calls back to those people that are early in grief, like when I'm further along, and to say that you can keep doing it. Because I remember this hike that David and I did in Colorado, and it was equivalent to a 100-story building just over 1 mile. So almost straight up.
Wow.
But it was called Hidden Lake Trail. And at the top, there was this hanging lake of like alpine blue water. And I had seen pictures of it, and I was like, I'm doing this hike. But the whole time I'm going up, everybody I see that's coming down, I'm like, is it worth it? Like, do I need to keep going? Like, how much further? Does it get
Right.
harder? And everybody's answer was just, they were sweaty and tired, but they'd all say, oh, it's worth it. Keep going. And had they said, well, it's exhausting, it's just really steep. And, if they had just told me that, I would have probably just turned around. But they just kept, calling you up, like, keep going, keep going. And so when you get to the top, when I get to the top or whatever it is, I may say, you're right, grief never goes away. But I don't think that's a message for people at the bottom. That's a message for people at the top after you've been on that journey. I just don't know that you can handle that at the bottom.
Right.
So I think God gave me that as my answer, because that just felt very hopeless to me to hear it never ends.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I read that once on a Facebook post. And so I looked in the comments because I was so angry when I read it. And I thought, oh, somebody's going to call her out in these comments because it was so depressing. Hundreds of comments, and they all said, amen. I agree. I feel the same. I couldn't find one person that said any different. So I know it must be true, but I think they must mean something different. That of course you're going to miss your person. You're going to think about them. You might tear up forever, but grief has to get lighter. It has to change in some way,
Right.
So I think it's better to focus on something else than that never goes away.
Right.
Well, and the timing of God's faithfulness. I mean, he has something for you each day. And so it would be hard to look too far in the future. Like, you can't experience his faithfulness for something you haven't faced yet.
Right.
But when it comes, that's when he provides himself. And so it's along the way. So it's very hard to look too far ahead, no matter what situation you're walking through, because his mercies are new every single day. There's a reason I think that those words are used. And he is faithful every single day. And Julie, I think we would all love to hear, how are you taking care of yourself? It's hard to even focus on self-care or say that, but you're still living. You're here. Even on your birthday, your friends wanted to celebrate you. We still want to celebrate you. And how are you taking care of yourself?
Well, I haven't thought too much about self-care, but I went to my doctor the other day, like for a thyroid checkup. And he's just such a great doctor, and he just sits and talks, and he asks about John. And, before he ask about your thyroid, he asks about you and your life. And I love that. And then he said, okay, well, now it's time to take care of you. Do you have a doctor, like a regular doctor, And I was like, well, and he just, I really appreciated that he focused on, you need this, like, you need to do this, like, to have somebody in your life saying, I want you to do this. Because now John's not here to ask me that, and I don't think my kids would ever ask me if I'm going to the doctor. So I appreciated that. And these are not my own thoughts. I read this from a writer that I've been reading, Clarissa Malls. I've talked about her before, but she said, taking care of me is a way of actually loving John. Like, he loved me. He took care of me. He saw value in me. So when I take care of myself, it's doing something that mattered to John. And I just thought that was so wise, John would want me to do that. So I'm going to do it, So I've already made plans in January to see my doctor, and but it's not, I've not had trouble as far as like, oh, I don't want to brush my teeth or comb my hair. Like, that's just not me, those haven't been hard for me. But as far as the doctor, all of that is a little daunting. Like, I got COVID actually before Christmas. And that was something that kind of triggered some new grief, because it was the first time I was sick without John. that felt weird, like my mom's here, David's here, but it's just not the same, Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, being sick was different.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you want to share with listeners, like even just podcasting wise, or how you view going forward? I mean, I know that in addressing this today, what we really want listeners to know is that, one, God has been so faithful to you and carrying you through this and what he's done, but also that when you hear Julie on the podcast talking about whatever topic we pick, it doesn't mean that she's forgotten about John. If she laughs, that doesn't mean that, she's forgotten about John. Like, we just really, it's uncomfortable for her. And I think it would be for me. You don't want to be perceived as just because you're happy about something that means that you're not sad about John.
Yeah. And that's why I think I appreciate you letting me do this, because just like when he was diagnosed, it felt weird to get on and laugh and talk about something silly or, like frivolous, like if it's about talking about makeup or something like, like, why does that matter? And, but it does, real life still matters. And I'm looking forward to being back. I've missed it. And just know that I'm moving forward, but I've not moved on. And that everything I say will probably be filtered by my grief in some way, that will affect what I have to say about everything probably. And one thing I would like to say that our pastor preached a sermon yesterday on joy, and it was really, really good. And one of the things he talked about was, like when it can seem kind of plastic when people say God is good, and then the church says all the time. Does your church do that? Like where the pastor will say God is good, and the whole church will say all the time. And I have always been very cynical about that. Because in one way you could look at somebody and say, well, of course God is good. Like, look at your life. You could say that, because they have a good life. And actually, I always thought that about my life. Like, I've always felt like I would kind of sheepishly say all the time, because I didn't know if God was good, or if I didn't know if I believed God was good if something really tragic happened. I was like, well, I don't know if I can say that because I've not lost a child or a husband or been sick, whatever. So I just always kind of quietly said it, and now I can say that I know it. And so like, I can say that because I know I believe it now. And so when I have fears about the future, which I do, I have to say, well, God is good, and he was good this time, and he'll be good again. In whatever I face, because I think when we worry about the future, we picture ourselves in whatever situation alone, like without him. In our worries, we don't put him out there, But in reality, he will be there. So I thought that was neat that the pastor, he even admitted that he struggled with that phrase, because sometimes it can seem plastic, like like we're just saying that, and we're like it denies any trouble we have in our life or fears, but we can say, hey, life stinks right now, but God is good. You can say both.
I think a lot of people can relate to that, and I think that we are privileged to know you and be able to see God's faithfulness. And I was sharing with Julie yesterday that it's like I admire how she feels and what God is doing, but I want to see it from afar. Like, I don't really want to have to go through that to get there. And so I think that that's behind the not wanting to say all the time too, because we don't really want to know if it's all the time. Not
right. You'd
really.
rather just trust somebody else's opinion on that. Right. But it does feel good for that assurance to know it, because I can honestly say, really until this, I didn't know that I could say it with absolute confidence.
And that's comforting, I'm sure, to people that are going through something right now, that you also have been through something and you can still say that. And so they can think, maybe I can say that at some point too.
Yeah, I
Right.
think the key is to stay with God and question him and wrestle with things before God. I heard somebody say it's not wrestling with God. Like when Jacob wrestled with God, God left him with a limp. It's
Right.
wrestling with things before God.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think when we wrestle with God, we could walk away. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think as long as we're staying before him, he's going to meet us. He's not afraid of those
Right.
questions and those doubts and those fears.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about that a lot. It's not that we won't face trouble in the world, because we will. The Bible tells us, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And we can't borrow God's faithfulness in the future, but we all have fears and anxieties when we look even to tomorrow. And a verse I'd love to share right here is Psalm 116, verse 7. It's, "Be at rest once more, O my soul, for the Lord has been good to me." And I think that we can't truly experience rest or him or peace unless you're really having an open-handed approach with the things that are on your heart. And so this is a verse that I hope is also encouraging just at this time, as we listen to your story, Julie. It sounds like you're at rest in the midst, that God is providing and God is faithful.
Yeah, I am. And it is that supernatural peace that you can't explain. Like I've not experienced that before. Like all my fears and worries when John was alive have not come to pass when he's gone, because God is there. And it's just sometimes just hard to explain. It's just a mystery,
Right.
of how it all transpires. But he is faithful.
Yeah. And you can really say that all the time now. So,
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on and sharing today. I know that this will be encouraging to listeners, and I'm so encouraged by it. I know Mindy is. Listeners, if you want to come and find us, or you have a message for Julie, you can find us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast, or you can always email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. We want you to know that all your messages of sympathy and prayers, they have meant a lot to Julie.
Yes. Yeah. So many people have messaged me and say that they pray for me, and I'm just overwhelmed that, you'd think of me and do that. So I really appreciate it. We definitely have felt the prayers and continue to.
All right. Well, we won't sign off in our usual way. We do want to talk next week. We are going to talk about some what people might consider more frivolous things, but they are just the stuff of life. They're the stuff of midlife. And that's why we're here, as friends, to come together each week. So thanks, Julie, for coming on today. I was really ministered to by hearing from you.
Well, thank you. And it's good to see you guys again all together.
Yes. It's so great to see you, Julie, and we're going to walk forward together.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you guys next week.
All right. Goodbye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.